So, this is Owen Jones, who gave an interview to the BBC in the past couple of days about the anti-Semitism scandal in the Labour Party. Now, why is anti-Semitism important? Because it's a symptom of something nasty. I mean, anti-Semitism in itself is nasty enough, but there's something worse at the heart of it. When the Nazis made anti-Semitism their policy, they didn't just end there. That's the lesson that we have to learn about this. They started off killing Jews. They ended up killing their own children. We know all about the death hospitals they had for people who were considered substandard, had mental or physical disabilities, that sort of thing. So there's something particularly nasty about anti-Semitism that's not just to do with hating Jews. And there have been several instances where Jeremy Corbyn has been caught, subscribed to Facebook pages, and these particular Facebook pages have been, one of them at least seemed to have nothing else to do but talk about how terrible Jews are. And the thing is that the stories are mostly made up. You think of something vile in yourself and then you blame it on the Jews. So that's why societies disintegrate with that sort of a system. Anyway, here's Owen Jones, and the BBC have wheeled him out to apologise to Corbyn. And to my surprise, they're actually, well, they could give him a worse time, but they're not giving him as soft a ride as I had expected.
Firstly, those in the Labour Party, including the Labour leadership, anti-racism was one of their defining causes. In the 1980s, they were portrayed as the loony left, politically correct, shutting down free speech because of that anti-racism. What is that going?
Just a minute. Now, a few years ago, I was actually talking to a Polish academic who was, according to his friend, the last communist in Poland. This was well after the Polish Communist Party had long gone, but still, he was telling me how marvellous communism really was. And he made this point that medieval kings were much worse and held people back much more strongly than communism ever did. And I said, but Marek, that was like 600 years ago. But he just kept on repeating that. So I think that's one of the tropes that communists are given to compare communism with some sort of earlier system and thereby make themselves feel better about communism. And it looks like Owen Jones is using the same trope, which interests me. I wonder if this is something given in handouts for the socialist handbook of how to answer interviewers. Anyway, back to Owen Jones. Yes, indeed. What does this have to do with modern anti-Semitism?
To do with the anti-Semitism
argument? It's to do with the fact that there's an attempt to link the minority, the despicable minority, who will be drummed out of the Labour movement.
They weren't drummed out. That's the problem. It's been known about it's been known about for a long time, because I saw it in the BBC when I was working there, a lot of socialists there, and this was years and years and years ago, and they were like that then.
The anti-Semites, the bigots who had nothing to do with socialism, to link that to the Labour leadership. You know what's happening, you know what that front page splash is all about. I'll give you an example. That Sunday Times splash, because you were leading on it the last hour, I did watch, by the way. And
I'm not disputing what might have been done earlier. What I'm saying to you is, isn't the story of the Sunday Times, presumably if the Sunday Times had found any evidence that linked an individual to it, they would have gone on that.
No,
they didn't find that.
What they did is went on Facebook groups with tens of thousands of members, with hundreds of thousands of posts, millions probably of comments cumulatively, found despicable racist and anti-Semitic comments, then tried to link that to the fact that there were people within the leader's office who are the most committed anti-racist.
Just a minute. Committed anti-racist with Jeremy Corbyn there at a Hamas rally where people were waving banners saying to the effect of "kill the Jews" or shouting slogans to the same effect.
Probably ever met. Look, I've got an example here, just to show how these splashes work.
Oh look, I have in my hand a piece of paper.
This so-called journalism, okay? Where's your camera? This is Conservatives Against the EU. It's a Facebook group.
Conservatives Against the EU, what's that meant to mean? I could call myself Chinese Against Tibet. Does that make me either Chinese or a member of the Chinese government, or indeed even against Tibet? I could start a Facebook page for anything.
It is full of the most despicable racism I've ever seen.
Presumably the Conservative Party would reject it.
Yes, presumably the Conservative Party would reject it. And, Owen darling, I have noticed that neither Theresa May nor Boris Johnson has shown up on this Facebook page or any other with such content, unlike Jeremy Corbyn, who's been on at least, I think it's 4 that show anti-Semitic content, and one of which seems to have been set up for actually nothing else but anti-Semitic content. That's all they seem to talk about. And it's full of conspiracy theories and made-up stories, and Corbyn was subscribed to it.
About Gina Miller, for example, F off you foreigner.
What does this have to do with anything?
Telling them to go back to your homeland. Fine. It's despicable racism. You're not making that. Why?
It isn't the top story because the top people in the Conservative Party aren't on that page.
Isn't that? Why is
because
that?
Presumably Labour is the story at the moment, but why is they not able to change the narrative?
That's the point.
What do you think Jeremy Corbyn now has to do to change the narrative? Just briefly.
He won't answer what Jeremy Corbyn has to do. He's got to filibuster.
Just quickly on that. Briefly, if you know. Well, there has to be the implementation of the
Yeah. Well, the Chakrabarti whitewash, you mean, Mr. Jones?
Right. And to root out any...
root out any member. You'd have hardly any members left, because you get most of your support in the Labour Party from Muslim voters who are steeped in anti-Semitism. I'm not saying, not all, obviously, but there is a very strong element of anti-Semitism in the Muslim community in Britain, and we all know that. And we shouldn't be afraid to say it. Well, you're afraid to say it, obviously.
That's what the leadership have said, but I'm not going to take lessons from supporters of the Conservative Party.
Well, I think you should, because they seem to know more about things than you do, Mr. Jones.
Foreign Secretary says things like pickaninnies with watermelon smiles about black people.
Well, I don't know how Boris Johnson actually said that, but it doesn't sound like he's talking about killing them. You know, Jones reminds me of a fish. Well, when a fish has been hooked out of a river and it's flailing about on the riverbank, not quite knowing why it's not in its element anymore, and not understanding why it can't move forward anymore, and just knowing that it's in a terrible position, and just flapping about trying to get some sense out of existence. That's what you look like, Owen Jones.
He says about gay people that
we're not doing an interview about Boris Johnson.
No, but you're not going to focus on that.
We're not doing an interview about Boris Johnson. We're doing one about Jeremy Corbyn and his second-in-command, who've come out with the most, well, the second-in-command has come out with the most disgusting stuff. And Corbyn, who's been on a Facebook page, 4 Facebook pages, one of which was violently anti-Semitic, the other 2 just, well, mildly so, I suppose.
And look, the amount of abuse the likes of Diane Abbott, a lifelong anti-racist, one of the most senior members of Labour's leadership,
and one of the great mathematicians of Britain, look it up about her answer to how she's going to fund more police. That's the funniest thing Owen said in this whole interview.
But she got more than half of all online abuse during the election of any MP.
That's because she is completely incompetent, Owen. She's totally incompetent and shouldn't be anywhere near government. And she's a hypocrite.
Often from Tory supporters and Tory members. There's no story about that. I get called every single day online.
What does that have to do with the anti-Semitism row?
A faggot by, for example, Tories.
We're going to leave it there because there's obviously a lot we could talk about in terms of abuse, both online and in the media. Thank you very much for being with us.
And why didn't you just say you're not making any sense, Mr. Jones? Oh, well, that's the BBC for you. I wonder how long it's going to take Owen Jones to ditch this religion he's adopted. I don't have a lot of hope for that.